house was already full when the first fireworks began. It was a large place, gated, expensive in a way that didn't announce itself. From the outside it looked reserved, almost plain, but inside it settled the question immediately. A wide, double-height living room opened into the rest of the house. A long staircase curved along one wall, already crowded with coats and handbags. Warm lighting, marble floors broken up by thick rugs, glass doors opening onto a garden and terrace where people drifted in and out, the outdoor lights having been switched on hours earlier and left alone. At the far end of the lawn, a cleared stretch had been marked off for the small fireworks display they'd arranged to ring in the new year. They had planned for well over 120 guests. Friends from law school, colleagues, a few clients who had drifted into their social circle over the years, spouses, partners, children who had grown up alongside one another and now moved in and out of the living room, phones glowing in their hands. The husband moved through the house easily. He was used to gatherings like this. A successful lawyer, well-known, well-connected. He spoke to people without effort, never staying in one place long enough to feel trapped. His wife handled the rest. Quiet conversations with the caterers, a word here, a glance there, making sure glasses stayed full, coats were taken, the music stayed loud enough to feel celebratory without taking over the room. People arrived in small groups, old friends together, colleagues in pairs, neighbors stopping in briefly before heading elsewhere. And then there was one man who arrived alone. Neither of them noticed him at first. He fit in too easily. He was dressed well, polite, relaxed. He laughed when others laughed and listened when they spoke. When he shook hands, it felt natural, like he'd been doing it in that room for years. At some point, the wife noticed him stacking a few empty glasses on a sideboard near the bar, passing them along to a helper as she moved through the room. She paused, surprised for just a moment, then dismissed it. Some people were simply like that. Later, she mentioned him to her husband in passing. "Do you know who that is?" she asked, nodding toward the man across the room. He followed her gaze. The man was talking with a small group near the bar, smiling, listening more than he spoke. The husband frowned. "No," he said, "probably came with someone." They asked around. They brought it up casually at different moments, careful not to make it awkward. No one recognized him as their guest. Each person reacted the same way. A shrug, a laugh, the assumption that he must belong to someone else. The party carried on. The man avoided alcohol. He held a glass, but it was always water or juice. He ate little. He complimented the house without overdoing it. He spoke briefly with the husband about work, about how exhausting the end of the year always seemed to be. One of the husband's friends left early, well before midnight, complaining of a sudden stomach issue. They joked about the food. The husband waved them off and promised to check in later. Midnight came. The countdown filled the house. Glasses lifted, kisses exchanged. Outside, the first of the fireworks they had arranged burst above the garden, lighting the glass doors in quick white flashes. The man was there, clapping, smiling, stepping aside so others could have their moment. After 1 a.m., people began to leave, slowly at first, then in groups, then in pairs. By 2:30, the house had gone quiet. Only the closest friends remained. Then one couple, then no one. The helpers were gone. The music had been turned off. The lights were dimmer. The man was still there. He stood near the window, looking out into the dark garden as if he were waiting for something. The wife felt it then. The subtle shift. The moment when courtesy gave way to unease. She caught her husband's eye. He gave a small nod. He felt it too. They approached him together. "I think that's everyone," the husband said lightly. "Do you need us to call you a cab?" The man turned and smiled. "No," he said. "I'm where I need to be." Something in the room changed. You could feel the stillness in the way he spoke, like nothing more needed to be said. "I should explain," the man continued. "I stayed because I needed to talk to you without anyone else around." The husband's smile faded. "I know who you are," the man continued, "but you don't know me, so let me introduce myself properly." The man then went on to mention about the court case from 3 years earlier. It was a high-profile murder trial, a conviction that had helped build the husband's career. The husband's face tensed as he began to remember the details. "My father was executed for that," the man said. "You made a convincing argument. The jury believed every word." The wife looked from one man to the other, confused. The man said casually, "One of your guests tonight was the one who actually did it, right?" He named the friend who had left early, the one who hadn't been feeling well. "He won't last the night," the man said, slow-acting poison into his drink when no one noticed. "Don't worry, you'll hear soon enough." Just then, the husband's phone buzzed as if on cue. It was the hospital. The husband's friend was in critical condition. The man lifted a hand. "This wasn't about revenge," he said. "It was about setting things straight." He spoke calmly about how he'd done it, how no one would remember him clearly, how everyone assumed he belonged, how he'd spent the last 3 years making sure his name no longer led anywhere that mattered. "I'm telling you this," he said, meeting the husband's eyes, "so you understand what this is." The house felt suddenly hollow. The husband was too shocked to speak or argue. "If you keep going the way you are," the man continued, "I'll be back next year." He turned toward the door. "You didn't notice me tonight," he said. "You won't notice me then either." With these words, he finally left. The door closed behind him, gently. The husband stood where he was, phone still lit in his hand, his wife looking on with one hand on her mouth and crying softly. Somewhere beyond the walls of the house, the city had settled back into its late-night quiet. The new year had begun. I'm a nurse. It's usually the first thing I tell people about myself because it explains most of the rest without me having to spell it out. Why I miss calls, why I cancel plans, why I'm needed somewhere else when I'm supposed to be home. This New Year's Eve was supposed to be different. I was scheduled to leave early at 10, which almost never happens, but I caught a lucky break this year. The plan was simple. Go home, shower, sit on the couch with my sister, and let the year end quietly. Nothing loud or celebratory, just being in the same room again. My sister had just gotten out of rehab. I hadn't really seen her in close to 2 years. We never had a clean break or a final conversation where anything was resolved. It was slower than that, and worse. We had lived together for a while, back when her life was already coming apart, when the drugs had stopped being something she used and started being something that controlled her. I worked nights, and she promised she could handle things while I was gone. One night, our mother, who was also living with me then, had an asthma attack. Her inhaler was kept in the bedroom, and my sister knew that. She was there, but she was out of it, barely conscious from God knows what she had been taking, and didn't bring it to her. I got home just in the nick of time, and our mother brother survived, but the relationship between my sister and me did not. I trusted her when I shouldn't have, and I noticed the signs long before that night. I just chose not to confront them, because naming them would have meant facing what was already happening. After that night, I asked my sister to move out. Rehab followed, and whatever was left between us went quiet. So when she messaged me asking if she could come over for New Year's Eve, I didn't answer right away. I stared at my phone longer than I should have. She said she wanted to start over, that the new year felt like the right place to try again. Eventually, I said yes. I left my spare key outside, like she asked. At 10 o'clock, I texted her from the nurse's station and told her I was leaving soon. I promised her I'd be home. She replied almost immediately and told me she would be waiting. 10 minutes later, an emergency came in. A drunk driver, barely 22 years old, with severe internal injuries. The hospital was short-staffed, and the operating room needed extra hands. Someone said my name before I could step away, and I followed without thinking, because that's what you do. As I walked toward the operating room, I thought about messaging my sister. I'd told her I was leaving soon, and for a moment, I considered explaining the delay. I didn't. I told myself it wouldn't be long enough to matter, that there was no point worrying her over what would probably be a short wait. I kept telling myself it wouldn't take long, but of course, it did. It turned into a complicated surgery. I assisted where I could, passing instruments, holding pressure, doing whatever was needed while the surgeons worked to save the young man's life. When I finally stepped out, my hands were shaking and my scrubs were damp, and it was close to 1:30 in the morning. I checked my phone. There were missed calls, spaced out at first, then closer together. Messages asking if I was still coming, telling me it was okay if I was late, saying she understood. Then the tone changed. She asked if she had done something wrong. She said she knew I was tired of her. The last message came just after midnight. She wished me a happy new year and told me she loved me. I called her immediately. She didn't answer. I told myself she had fallen asleep. Emotional nights were hard for her, and it made sense that she would crash after waiting that long. When I finally left the hospital, the city was still noisy. Sirens in the distance, cars idling at intersections, people shouting Happy New Year to one another as they drifted home. By the time I reached my apartment, the street had that worn-out quiet it gets after a long night, when even the noise feels tired. The lights were off inside. She was lying on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, the way she used to when she didn't want to admit she was exhausted. For a moment, I felt relief. I remember thinking I'd worried for nothing. Then I saw the needles on the floor. They weren't hidden or pushed aside. They were just there, scattered like she hadn't bothered to clean up before falling asleep. I felt anger rising within me, sharp and immediate, at the carelessness of it, at the mess left behind, like I didn't matter enough to come home to something better. Memories of that night from 2 years ago, and of every near overdose before it, came back in waves, feeding the anger before I had time to think. I dropped my bag and called out her name. When she didn't answer, I reached for her hand and began to shake it, then more violently her shoulder, shouting her name as the anger broke through into tears, my voice rising even as my eyes filled and spilled over. I didn't understand what was wrong yet. Then I realized something as horror took over from anger. Her skin was cold. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember the neighbors or the paramedics or being told things I already knew. What I remember is sitting on the floor last message she sent me. Happy New Year. I had promised her I was coming home. I believed it when I said it. I buried her a week later. People told me it wasn't my fault, that addiction doesn't wait, that there was nothing I could have done. Maybe they're right. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that message I sent at 10 and wonder what would have happened if I had sent the one I almost sent, telling her I would need more time. She was waiting for me, and I didn't come. My name is Samuel Mercer, and I still think about that drive every New Year's Eve. I left Salt Lake City later than I was supposed to. Work had run over again. A system migration that should have wrapped up by noon dragged on until nearly 5. By the time I merged onto I-15, the sun was already gone, and the city lights were thinning behind me. It was December 31st, 2005. Home was Boise, a little over 5 hours away. If everything went smoothly, I'd still make it back before it turned into the new year. I kept telling myself that as I drove. My wife would be disappointed, but she'd understand. Our son had just turned 1. He wouldn't remember the night. I would. The cold was dry and uncomfortable, the kind that seeps in even with the heater on. I flipped through radio stations until I landed on an old rock channel that always came in clean on long drives. Metallica's The Unforgiven was playing. I turned it up and left it there. I'd always loved old rock and metal. It was familiar, steady, and it made the road feel shorter. By then, there weren't many cars on the road. Sometimes minutes passed without seeing another set of headlights. About 2 hours into the drive, I saw him. A man standing near the shoulder of the road. One hand in his jacket pocket and the other signaling at me for a ride. He didn't have a bag with him, and it was a surprise to see someone standing alone like that in the middle of nowhere. I passed him initially, then slowed down before I had time to talk myself out of it. I knew better. I had a family now, but it was cold, and he didn't look dangerous. I reversed and pulled over. He got in quickly, closing the door against the cold. "Appreciate it," he said, then added, "Almost thought you would carry on and leave me here. You're the first car I've seen in at least 10 minutes. I asked where he was headed. "Mountain home," he said. Figured I'd try my luck there. That was still a way off. An hour from Boise, but lucky for him, it was on my way. He was older than I expected, but he sounded calm and steady. I glanced at him as I pulled back onto the road. Late 50s maybe. Short gray hair, a lined face that looked like it had spent a lot of time outdoors. We drove in silence for a minute or two. Metallica faded into Pink Floyd, then into Led Zeppelin. I realized I hadn't said anything since he got in. "Long night to be standing out there," I said finally. He nodded once. "Yeah, it's colder than it looks." The music filled the space between us without either of us commenting on it. Then he nodded slightly toward the radio. "Good station," he said. "Yeah," I replied. "They usually play the good stuff this late." When the chorus came in, he sang along. Not the best singer, but he wasn't off-key either. In fact, it reminded me of the way I sing when I'm alone and think no one can hear me. I smiled thinking about it. We started to talk about music for a while. Albums we'd worn out. Songs that still held up. Live concerts we always meant to see and never did. The conversation drifted after that. Hobbies we used to have before time got tight. I mentioned that I used to paint when I had the patience for it, that I still played guitar when I could find the time. He said he'd done the same, played guitar, messed around with painting years ago. Same kind of music, same way of killing time when life was quieter. He mentioned his kids then, a son and a daughter, both grown, both working, both off living their own lives now. He talked about them simply, without nostalgia or pride, the way people do when they've had time to make peace with how things turned out. I told him about my son. He was only one, still at that age where every day felt new to him and exhausting to everyone else. He smiled when I said that. A small, knowing smile, like he understood exactly what that stage of life felt like. He remembered parts of himself I'd forgotten I cared about, parts of life I hadn't thought about in years. He mentioned, almost casually, that it was easy to let those parts slip away if you weren't paying attention. The work you bury yourself in, the people you keep meaning to show up for. He said it the way someone does when they're not trying to teach a lesson, just stating something they'd learned the hard way. After a while, we started talking about work, about long hours and the slow weight of responsibility. He talked about how easy it is to make decisions without realizing you're making them. You don't notice it when it's happening, he said. You only see it later. I told him about my job in tech, the deadlines, the constant feeling of being behind even when things are going well. Don't let it take everything, he said. Work, I mean. Make time for the things that matter, and the people. It goes faster than you think. I nodded while I let his words settle in. I went to Utah State, I said at one point, mostly to fill the quiet. Yeah, Logan, he said immediately. I glanced at him. You too? Long time ago, he replied. What did you study? I asked. Computer science, came his prompt reply. I laughed softly. That's what I do. I know, he said. He said it plainly, like it was obvious. I realized then that I hadn't asked his name. Sorry, I said. What's your name? He looked out the window for a moment, watching the road slide past under the headlights. Samuel, he said. I laughed. Seriously? He didn't laugh back. We drove on. The road ahead flattened out into a long, empty stretch. The dashboard clock edged closer to 9. Then I noticed him go quiet, his attention fixed on the road ahead like he was listening for something I couldn't hear. Slow down, he said. What? I asked. Pull over, he said, calm but firm. My heart jumped. Why? Please, he said. Now, I need to get off. I eased off the accelerator and started to brake. That was when I saw the headlights. A truck was coming fast in the opposite lane. There was a sharp crack as a tire blew, and the truck fishtailed, tipped, and rolled, metal screaming as it slid across the highway and came to rest on its side exactly where I would have been seconds later if I had not started to brake when he told me. I slammed the brakes, and the car came to a stop. I turned toward the passenger seat. It was empty. There was no open door, no movement, just the engine idling and the radio still playing softly. Then his voice came again, not beside me, but everywhere. I came back for this night, for us, it said. Us, I said aloud. What? My hands were shaking on the wheel. And 30 years from now, he said, his voice steady. On March 18th, 2035, whatever you do, don't get on that flight. You'll think it's important, a meeting you can't miss. But listen to me, Samuel. Please remember the date. He paused, just long enough for the words to sink in. You don't make it home from that one. I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe. Remember what I told you, Samuel, he went on. Don't let work take everything. Make time for the things that matter, for the people who matter. We don't get as many chances as we think. Then his tone shifted, becoming practical again, almost ordinary. Now help the man in the truck, he said. Call it in. Stay until until someone gets there, then go home. Our wife and our son are waiting for us." After that, there was nothing. His voice was gone, leaving only the road, the overturned truck, and the sound of my own breathing in the car. I sat there longer than I should have, staring ahead, letting it settle in. Eventually, I called 911. I gave my location and reported the crash, answering their questions automatically, like my body knew what to do, even if my mind didn't. When I hung up, the radio went dead. The clock on the dashboard read 9:15 p.m. I made it home that night. And every year since, when New Year's Eve comes around, I think about that drive, and I make sure I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I haven't seen him again, and I think that's because I decided to listen to what he told me.